welcome back to Live and Breathe Horses. And today we are going on with this wonderful book, More Than a Horseman, which is a collection of stories about Tom Dorrance from those who knew and loved him. Today's story comes from Terry Church. I used to identify myself as a long-time dressage trainer, which meant I thought I knew a lot about riding and training horses. Then I met Tom. It was 1990 and he'd just turned 80. The first time I spoke with him, I couldn't figure out why it took 10 minutes to convince him to take my money in exchange for his help. But he made it clear from the start that how others wanted to ride and handle their horses was up to them, and that I was probably better off not associating myself with him at all. When I showed up for my first session anyway, I naively thought he would tell me what I needed to know in order to fix my horses. He'd certainly been right about me not knowing what I was in for. I had no idea how lucky I was. I was an eager, ambitious student, bringing each of my horses in training to work with him many times over the years. In the early days, I'd begin my rides but trying to explain what I'd been having trouble with, like canter pirouettes or flying lead changes. In spite of the fact that Tom did not ride dressage per se, I knew that he knew what those movements required of a horse, that he could tell me what I'd been missing and give me some exercises to fix them. When he simply nodded in an unconcerned way, I would feel the need to explain myself again, adding more detail about the horse I was riding. At some point during my monologue, he would clear his throat and motion for me to come outside the arena. In a few minutes, I'd find myself riding on a loose rein over rocks in the creek bed, wondering how he'd managed to coerce me there and why my horse was stumbling so much. I'd stop, look up at him gazing down at me from the top of the bank as he sat comfortably in the golf cart he drove to follow me around the field, and ask him if he thought my horses were shod properly. It was the only thing I could think of to explain their complete lack of coordination. He looked at me with a kind gaze while I waited for his response. When I finally figured out that I would not be getting one, I sighed and continued walking my horse over rocks, feeling stupid and confused. For a long time, I waited for Tom to tell me what I was doing in the creek bed, or why it was so important to let my horse snake around tires rather than make them step directly over one, or how to ride them in a thicket of underbush related to collection, as I hid myself from other horses and riders nearby, or how exactly wading through the middle of a stream was helpful to straighten them for my lateral work. Needless to say, our sessions together were not the usual spoon-feeding of information I had grown accustomed to throughout my school years, and certainly not throughout my years of formal dressage training. Instead, riding through bush and in and out of gullies and over uneven terrain seemed pointless and almost boring. At the same time, involving myself in those activities made time slow down, giving me the freedom to really think about what I was doing. I began to notice the details of the world around me. I began to see how my actions affected the way my horses felt inside themselves, rather than merely how they responded, or didn't respond, to my aids. At home, I'd hear others acknowledge that Tom was an impressive horseman, but that he wasn't a great teacher because he doesn't know how to explain things. I wanted to agree with them. I wanted it to be Tom's fault that I was still having trouble with canter pirouettes. At the same time, I couldn't deny that my horses were, well, changed in other ways I hadn't expected. One stopped having girth issues. Another no longer became flustered by sudden movements out the corner of his eye. Another could now stand quietly for the shoer without drugs. And another was no longer barn sour. It was by piecing together these improvements with what we'd done at Tom's that I began to learn what had really been taking place in the fields outside his house. I can't teach a person anything, Tom would often say, but if they're willing, then maybe I can help them learn something. After several years of Tom creating situations within which I could learn something, I remember the day I finally understood why my horse had had troubles performing canter pirouettes. The realisation came after another stint of riding over rocks in the creek bed. I happened to notice that my horse was no longer stumbling, but picking his way nimbly and effortlessly through the rubble. He knows where his feet are now, I said to myself, the light bulb going off in my head. So I tried a canter pirouette on a whim. While it wasn't exactly fit for competition, I was shocked by how easily my horse was suddenly able to organise himself and get around, without tension, without strain, without confusion. Then it hit me. My horse hadn't ever learned how to organise himself because I'd never given him a chance. As a dutiful, over-controlling dressage rider concerned with precision and perfection, I'd been too busy telling him where to place every foot instead of just shutting up and giving him time to learn how to coordinate his own body. You mean my horse's problems were all about me? Of course, Tom had known that all along. He also knew that if he'd tried to tell me that, I would never have hung around long enough to learn it. I can't teach a person anything, Tom would often say, but if they're willing, then maybe I can help them learn something. That's such a wonderful thought, isn't it? Just the way it should be. So thank you for joining me today. Such a pleasure to read these stories. I hope you're enjoying them as much as I am enjoying reading them. Thank you, and keep tuning into the light.